Hello everyone and welcome to another video on Macbeth. Today we're going to be focusing on Act 2 Scene 1, so it's the first lesson in Act 2. Act 1 is now done and now we're into the thick of it with what happens after Duncan is murdered. You're going to need a few things in front of you. This PowerPoint, you're also going to need this document which looks something like this, and a few browser windows open because there's a few links to follow. So let's make a start. First of all, let's think about terminology. Elision. What is elision? Not to be mistaken with elision, which is a double L, but elision is a dramatic technique that places some of the action of the play off stage, away from the audience's eyes. So, in between Act 1 and Act 2, Shakespeare uses elision as Duncan's murder occurs away from sight. And that's particularly important. It could be for a few reasons. Maybe the regicide of Duncan is too horrific to even contemplate, let alone to see, because it goes so far against the great chain of being. Or maybe Shakespeare just wants to leave it up to the audience to decide the nature of the murder, and he doesn't want to actually put it into the audience's mind. There's a number of reasons, but also there's a number of elisions or elements of elision within Macbeth. Can you think of another example where something dramatic happens off stage so the audience can't see it? So there's two things for you to do here. Please write down what the definition of elision is here, and also write down where another element of elision takes place within Macbeth. Do that now. This particular scene is quite important to the whole of the play. Regardless of what question you get, you can probably talk about this particular scene, whether it's a question on the supernatural or on nature or on guilt. You're going to be able to talk about this particular part of the play. And there's two things that we need to concentrate on today. Essentially what happens in the scene is Macbeth talks to Banquo, and Macbeth lies to Banquo, saying that actually, although Banquo has been having dreams about the witches, Macbeth says that he hasn't really thought about them, which, as we know, is a total lie. So this is the first time he lies openly to his friend. And then the second part we're going to look at is this hallucination, this soliloquy of the dagger that Macbeth sees before him, which is depicted here. And he deliberates whether he will go through with killing the king, committing the most heinous act that man can do, and he eventually decides that he will. So, what I'd like you to do, please, is click this link, which will take you to this summary of this particular scene from Nerd Study. Then I would like you to summarize the scene in 20 words or fewer. That's in this box here on the document. So pause the video, watch this 3 minute and 5 second video, and please detail what is going on in this scene in this box here. Do that now. Go any further, I think it's quite important to understand what has happened just before this particular scene and why it's important to the whole structure of Macbeth. So we think about this scene, we've got Act 1, which is the witches. Macbeth is introduced as a hero, but he has this sort of ambitious streak. He has this vaulting ambition. He does begin to trust the witches and starts thinking deceitful thoughts. He sends a letter to his wife, and then Lady Macbeth has her soliloquy saying, "And sex me here." Duncan arrives at Macbeth's palace to celebrate the battle. They decide then to go and kill Duncan, but Macbeth has some serious doubts, and it's in this scene that Lady Macbeth persuades Macbeth to go through with the murder. The murder then happens off stage, and then we have Scene 1 of Act 2, in which we have a vision of a dagger that appears before Macbeth on the way to going to kill Duncan. So we've had this big long act of Macbeth being introduced as a warrior. Then he's sort of deciding whether he's going to go through it or not. He decides to, and then this scene here is where he goes to do the deed. That's why the structure is important, but the scene is important because it reveals that Macbeth is becoming increasingly skilled in the art of deception. He's starting to lie to his best friend Banquo, Banquo, who remember at the start of the play, is exactly the same as Macbeth. He has exactly the same role in the army, but Macbeth decides to take this deceitful route, whereas Banquo takes a virtuous route. His little test here, what themes are being continued, and maybe you can suggest through those emojis, pop your ideas within the document here. 2, it also establishes that Macbeth is desperately trying to wrestle with his own consciousness. He has a battle between his greedy ambition and his own moral compass. He doesn't know which way to go. He's confused, and his soliloquy suggests how confused he is. And finally, it suggests that our dark desires are often an overwhelming force. So what is Shakespeare trying to suggest about human nature here? Well, it suggests that Macbeth is just a normal human. He suggests that we are often deceived by the elements of darkness, things that we shouldn't be seduced by, but we are seduced by them because they are attractive, they're alluring, and certainly the witches have given Macbeth this nugget of information, and he's gone to run with it. He's decided to kill the king because he's had this tiny bit of information. So it's a 2-part question. Where does this happen in the play? Why is the scene important? So explain what's happened just before, and why is the scene important? Can you do that now? Pause the video and do that now. Okay, so the scene opens with Banquo and Macbeth having a conversation about the witches. This is the first time we've seen Banquo and Macbeth together, just the two of them, since they first met the witches. Remember, in that scene, Macbeth was told he would become Thane of Cawdor, which he was, and then he was going to become king, and he's now decided to kill the king. The next thing you need to be aware of is that Banquo was also given a prophecy. He said, although he won't be kings, his children will be kings, and he's there with Fleance, talking about how he's had a dream about the witches. Macbeth then says, I think not of them. Well, this is just a barefaced lie. Macbeth is starting to be deceitful to his best friend. He's saying, I'm not thinking about them at all, when we know that he is. We know that he's taken their advice to heart, because he's going to go and kill the king. Next, Macbeth says to Banquo, look, let's talk about it at a different stage. I've got something I want to talk to you about. Banquo says, but still keep my bosom franchise and allegiance clear, I shall be counselled. Essentially, Banquo saying, I'm going to do whatever you say, so long as I can do it with a clear conscience. Now, this is a very interesting comparison when we compare Macbeth and Banquo. At the start of Act 1, they are the same. They've got the same position in the army. But Banquo is different to Macbeth. He is Macbeth's foil. He's essentially the opposite of what Macbeth is. Macbeth is dark and deceitful and traitorous and murderous, whereas Banquo is virtuous, he's professional, and he's good and trustworthy. Now, we know that Banquo was a direct descendant of James I, which is why Shakespeare wants to portray Banquo as a good person, but also with this contrast, it makes Macbeth's actions look more deceitful and more untrustworthy. So I think this is an important conversation between the two of them, because it highlights how good Banquo is and how bad Macbeth is. So go ahead. What do these two exchanges allow us to understand about Macbeth's character, and how is Banquo starting to feel about Macbeth? There's a conversation here that I've written in the document, and go ahead in this space here, just fill in your answer to that particular question. Pause the video and do that now. On to the next part of the speech, the Dagger speech, one of the most famous soliloquies in all of Shakespeare, if not all of English literature. So I'm going to spend some time on this. But firstly, please click on this link and watch Sir Patrick Stewart's version of this particular soliloquy. It's 3.5 minutes long. Pause the video now and watch Sir Patrick. So welcome back. Hopefully now you have watched that speech. Now you need to read it through, because there's a lot of detail here. I've given you the modern day translation if it's helpful. What's important to understand really is that this is Macbeth's first hallucination. It's the first time he imagines something that isn't there. It links then, of course, with later on in the play where he imagines that Banquo's ghost is sitting in his seat. And you could argue also that it relates, again, in terms of hallucinations, to Lady Macbeth's blood on her hands and her sleepwalking. So hallucinations are something that's an important motif within Shakespeare, and always after the hallucination happens, something really bad happens. So it's Shakespeare highlighting to the audience, strap yourselves in, something dramatic is about to occur. So important to recognize why a dagger. Why has Shakespeare chosen a dagger as opposed to a sword or poison or anything like that? Well, a dagger is, as you know, it's a small knife, and you have to be very close to somebody to use a dagger. So it suggests that Macbeth is consciously thinking about killing Duncan at this stage. There's not a huge amount of collateral damage when it comes to stabbing someone, because you have to really think about it. You have to be very close to them. So the dagger is an important symbol because it suggests Macbeth's conscious decision to kill the king. And this would have been a horrendous thing for the audience to think about, that Macbeth's really going to go through with this. It's so horrendous that as you look through this particular part of the play, there are very few references to murder. Certainly Macbeth talks euphemistically about killing Duncan, but he's reluctant to say exactly what he's going to do because he doesn't want to think about it. He doesn't want to bring himself to think about it. So your task. It's a difficult task, but I think you should be good at it. Two things here. Please look through the quote on the left-hand side and consider quotes that shows that Macbeth is keen to kill King Duncan, and quotes that suggest that he is doubtful. I've started this for you already, so quotes to show that he is keen to kill. Come, let me clutch thee. That's Macbeth saying, come on, give me the dagger. I want to do the deed. But the suggestion that he is doubtful, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain. He's not sure if it's a real dagger, and he's not sure if his brain is making this up. So those are two parallel, contrasting considerations of Macbeth. I've got 5 spaces for you there. Can you fill in all 5? Give it a good go. Pause the video here. The last thing that I want everyone to do, think about the soliloquy, and specifically the end of the soliloquy here. We need to be thinking about the natural order of things. Remember the great chain of being, with God at the top and stones at the very, very bottom. Now, the reason I mention stones is because Macbeth is looking down at the ground and he's saying to the stones, hear not my steps which way they walk, for fear the very stones prate of my whereabouts. He's saying, even the stones know what I'm up to, and they're going to snitch, prate of what I'm doing. Now, the suggestion here is that what Macbeth is doing is goes so far against the natural order that even inanimate objects like the stones are willing to tell on him. It's impossible to really understand in the modern day the seriousness of the crime he is about to commit, but the fact that Macbeth is personifying these stones is almost like they are able to speak and they're able to tell what they're about to see suggests how terrified he is of what he is about to go through. It also suggests the depths that Macbeth is able to go to in his own mind, in his own body, in his own soul, that he's willing to go to this length. Because remember, the only person that really knows what's going on is the person right at the top of the natural order, that is God. And Macbeth knows that God can see exactly what he's doing, yet he is willing to sacrifice an eternity of hell for a few years of power while he is here on earth. So there's 2 things to do here. Consider why he's worried about the earth hearing him, and what does the personification of the stone suggest, if you can fill that in this part of the document here. There is an extension task as well. If he is indeed afraid of this, but still goes ahead with the murder, what do you think Shakespeare wants to understand about Macbeth's character and perhaps human nature? That's the extension question for you to fill in. to do, all of you really should be aiming for the highest grades possible. So if you click on this link, it will take you to this brilliant video by Tim Flynn, which gives you a really thorough, in-depth analysis of this very, very important scene. Go ahead, get yourselves onto that particular link, and you can make note at the bottom of the page or just in your own notebooks. Okay guys, that's it. Hopefully that makes sense. As usual, any questions, email your teacher.